Welcome back, night travelers, to Nakora nights. The Appalachian roads are long, winding, and sometimes they never end. You might think it's just the fog or the mountains, but some travelers swear they've seen things moving just out of the corner of their eyes. Tonight, we're taking you on 9 true Appalachian road trip horror stories. Encounters that made drivers question reality, shadows crossing the highway that disappear before you reach them, rest stops with lights that turn on, even though no one's there, figures standing along the roadside, staring and vanishing. These aren't myths. These are the stories from people who drove through the mountains and barely made it back. Before we hit the road, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because out here, after midnight, the roads take on a life of their own. If you're ready to ride with us into the unknown, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I survived the Appalachian roads. Now, keep your headlights on, hands on the wheel, and don't look in the rearview mirror. This is 9 untold most disturbing true Appalachian road trip horror stories. Let's begin. I always thought road trips were supposed to clear your head, but I learned fast that some roads hide things you should never see. My name is Mason, and before all this happened, I worked as a field technician for a small power company in Oklahoma, the kind of job where you drive long distances alone and think too much. Back then, I thought the worst thing I could find on a dark road was a broken transformer. I was wrong. What happened in the Appalachian Mountains changed everything for me, and no matter how much time passes, it still feels like I am back there, watching it unfold all over again. It started right after college, when everything felt heavy and uncertain. My closest friend, Ryder, had just inherited an old RV from his uncle, an ancient thing with faded paint and noisy doors but a working engine. He was restless, burnt out, sick of the town, and he said he wanted to drive east and see the night sky without streetlights drowning it out. I was tired of the same routine every day, so I said yes without thinking. Our other friend, Leon, joined just because he hated missing out. The plan was simple, or at least it felt that way. We packed fast, tossed whatever food we could find into bags, grabbed a few blankets, and pulled out with no map and no idea what the road ahead held for us. None of us knew that one small decision would drag us into something dark and impossible. The first couple of days were easy. Long, empty highways, tiny forgotten towns, and endless trees that moved like waves when the wind blew. Whenever we lost cell signal, it felt like the world became quieter. No messages, no calls, no real responsibility, only the road rolling under us. I remember thinking it was the first time in years I could breathe without pressure on my chest. But the mountains have a way of hiding danger behind beauty, and we were too young and careless to sense it. On the third night, we pulled over near a trail entrance somewhere in eastern Tennessee. I remember Ryder mentioning the town name once, but none of us could recall it later, no matter how hard we tried. It was like the place wiped itself out of our memory. We parked the RV, sat underneath the stars, and talked about nothing important, letting the cool air wash over us. That was when Ryder brought up something he called the hidden ring. He said locals whispered about gatherings deep in the woods where people met without phones or signals. I thought he was kidding, but he showed us a location he had pinned on his phone before we lost service hours earlier. It seemed random, but boredom is powerful, and the three of us were hungry for anything different. Around 7:45 p.m., we climbed back into the RV and followed the offline map. The road narrowed fast. Trees leaned over the roof, branches scraping against metal like fingers dragging across a door. We had not seen a house for miles, and there were no streetlights, only our headlights carving out a thin slice of visibility. Leon slept in the back while Ryder drove, and I sat up front, staring ahead because the dark outside felt like it was waiting for something. Then it happened. 2 figures appeared in the middle of our lane. Ryder slammed the brakes. The RV skidded, the tires screeched, and for a moment it felt like gravity forgot what to do. We stopped inches away from them. A woman and a small boy. The child had no shoes, his feet pale against the asphalt. The woman wore a long, heavy shawl that swayed slowly even though no wind touched it. Neither of them reacted to the headlights or the noise. They just walked forward in the same exact line, like they had not seen us, like we were not even there. I felt a cold wave wash through me as they passed the front bumper. I asked Ryder if he saw them clearly. His hands were shaking too much to answer. I pulled out my phone, but the GPS was frozen. Our location was just a blue dot floating in a huge green space with no roads, no signs, nothing. It felt like we had slipped off the map into some place that never wanted visitors, but there was nowhere to turn around, so we kept going. Minutes later, the road opened into a wide clearing with a dirt lot. A few RVs were already parked there, more than we expected. Instead of a quiet gathering, chaos filled the area. Flashlights bounced everywhere, voices cracked in panic, and one woman cried loudly. A child was missing. His parents rushed to us the moment we stepped out, their eyes wild with fear. The mother grabbed my arm and asked if we had seen a small boy, blonde hair, around 7 years old, wearing pajamas. Her voice broke with every word, and something inside me sank. I knew what we had seen. I asked Ryder to pull up the dash camera recording. When the mother saw the footage, she collapsed into her husband's chest. Her son was Jacob, the boy we almost ran over. They begged us to show them the exact spot we saw him. We turned around fast. Leon finally woke up, confused about why 3 cars were following us. I focused on the road, searching every shadow with my chest tight. I kept thinking about the woman we saw, the way she moved, slow and smooth, like she was gliding and not walking. The memory made my skin crawl. Something about her did not feel human. We found Jacob curled next to a drainage pipe about a mile away from where he was last seen. His parents ran to him instantly, holding him tight while he cried into their clothes. He was cold and scared, but alive. Ryder called the authorities from a part of the road where we managed to find a signal. When the police arrived, they said it looked like someone had taken him, but no one could explain how a person could slip into the camp unnoticed and lead a boy that far through the woods without being seen or heard. When the officers asked Jacob what happened, he said a lady held his hand and guided him away, telling him they were just going for a walk and she would bring him back soon. She told him to wait by the road and then stepped into the trees and vanished. He said she told him to stay quiet the whole time. We gave the dash cam to the officers. They returned it 2 weeks later, saying they had no leads, no suspects, nothing useful. But I remembered her face clearly. It was the way she smiled. It looked wrong, like the shape of her mouth fought against something underneath, like she was copying a smile she had seen before but did not understand how it worked. That detail still haunts me. Months passed, but my mind stayed stuck on that road. I kept seeing that barefoot boy, the shawl dragging across the ground, the empty expression. A year later, I forced myself to go back. I told myself I imagined everything, that my mind twisted the memory into something darker. I wanted proof that it was all in my head. Instead, I found nothing. The turnoff was gone. The trail was swallowed by trees. The clearing was fenced off with a rusted padlock. And the location Ryder had pinned was no longer anywhere on the offline map. It was like the road had erased itself. And yet, the nightmares did not stop. Every one of them had the same woman standing in the middle of a dark road waiting for me. And the road always felt like the one we drove that night. It was not just what happened to Jacob. There were 2 other moments on that trip I never told anyone about, things that felt small back then but make much more sense now. The first was the pickup truck. On our second evening before we reached the mountains, a dark pickup started following us. At first, it seemed like normal traffic, but after an hour, Ryder noticed it turned whenever we turned. He tested it by pulling into a gas station. The truck pulled in too and parked 1 space away. We got out to stretch and used the bathroom. When we walked back outside, the truck backed out slowly and waited until we pulled onto the road again. It followed us for over 2 hours, matching every stop and every turn. When the road split, Ryder chose a random direction. The truck followed, but the moment we reached a forested area, the truck suddenly slowed down and turned away without warning. Looking back, I wonder if the driver knew something bad waited ahead. The second moment was the GPS. Early into the mountain roads, my phone rerouted on its own. The signal had already dropped. Yet somehow the map changed and guided us onto a narrow dirt trail. We followed it because we were bored, not realizing how isolated it was. The trees were so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. That was when we found the abandoned cars, 3 of them, all sitting at odd angles, doors open, windshields shattered. Moss crawled up the sides, and leaves filled the seats as if no one had touched them in years. Leon joked that people probably dumped them there, but none of us believed that. Ryder kept the engine running the whole time, scared that if he turned it off, it would never start again. In those cars, you could feel something watching. We left fast. And then there was the woman on the road. Not the one we nearly hit with Jacob, a different one. Hours before that moment, while the sky was becoming dark and we were moving deeper into the mountains, I saw a shape ahead. A barefoot woman in a thin gown, standing right in the center of the lane. She vanished the instant our headlights hit her fully. I told myself it was fog, or a shadow, or my tired eyes messing with me. But after what happened to Jacob, I know better. Something was out there, waiting. All these moments connect now in my mind like pieces of a puzzle. The pickup truck following us might have been someone who knew the danger. The GPS sending us toward the abandoned cars felt like a warning from something else, or maybe a pull toward whatever lives in those woods. The barefoot woman vanishing under the headlights felt like a glimpse of something that does not belong in daylight. The night we almost hit Jacob and the strange woman, everything collided, and I cannot shake the feeling that she was not alone. The woods felt crowded even when we saw nothing. Every rustle and shadow felt like something moving just out of sight. The silence around her did not feel natural. It felt practiced, like she waited for people to wander into her path. Whenever I replay the dashcam recording, I try to understand what she was. Her face did not shift naturally. Her steps did not make noise. Her smile looked like something stretching skin instead of emotion. And the shawl she wore, it never fluttered even when our RV wind should have moved it. It hummed still, like it weighed more than it should. I think about Jacob saying she told him to stay quiet. I think about how she guided him gently away without force, like she had done it many times. I think about how she disappeared into the trees without making a single sound. And I think about how the path we drove that night no longer exists. The mountains keep secrets. Everyone says that. But I think some roads are not just forgotten. Some roads are taken back. If you have ever felt something watching you on an empty road, or seen something that should not exist when the lights fade, you know what I mean. If you have a story like this, I want to hear it. And if you want another tale from places people avoid, tell me what you want next. If you haven't already, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. And also, you can share this with your friends. Love you all. But remember one thing, some roads call you back, even when you no longer want to remember where they led. I knew something was wrong the moment the road stopped sounding like a road. Asphalt has a certain voice, that soft hum under the tires, steady and comforting, the kind that makes long drives feel safe. But on that day, the hum went silent, replaced by a strange low vibration that felt like it came from the trees themselves. I was 19 when this happened, still young enough to believe nothing truly bad could happen to me, old enough to hate how stupid that belief was later. That summer, my best friend Luke and I wanted to do one last road trip before life grabbed us. I had just finished my first year working full-time at a tiny auto parts warehouse outside Phoenix, and he was bouncing between part-time jobs, never really landing anywhere. We wanted to feel free, so we packed his beat-up Honda with snacks, clothes, and a cheap speaker that only worked if you smacked it on the side. Our plan was simple: drive through a few states, take pictures, and pretend the world wasn't waiting for us to grow up. We were somewhere deep in the Appalachian region when Luke found a different route on his phone. He said it cut through the old mountain backroads, a scenic shortcut that added maybe 2 hours. I didn't argue. I was tired and it sounded harmless. Just more trees, more quiet, more air that smelled like leaves instead of gas stations. The road started wide and normal, but every mile it narrowed a little more. The trees moved closer, leaning inward like they wanted to listen to the engine. The air felt heavier. My phone lost service. His did too. We joked about it at first, said stuff like this is how horror movies start, but comedy stops feeling funny when the world stops making sense. About 40 minutes in, we passed an old wooden sign leaning off to the side. It looked hand-painted, like someone carved the letters with a dull knife. It said, "Willow's Rest." The letters were jagged, uneven, almost frantic, like someone wrote them while shaking. Luke laughed and said it sounded like a fake haunted attraction. I smiled, but inside my stomach clenched, like my body noticed something my mind didn't. We kept driving. At exactly 3 miles past the sign, the car died. There was no warning, no sputter, no smell. Just a sudden dead silence, as if someone unplugged the entire world. Luke cursed and turned the key again. Nothing. The dashboard lit up fine, battery strong, but the engine wouldn't even try. Just a dry clicking sound that echoed inside my ribs. We got out and checked the hood. I didn't see leaks, smoke, anything. The engine looked normal, but my skin crawled. The air was too still. No wind, no insects, no distant rustle of animals. It felt like being inside a closed room, not a mountain road. Luke suggested we walk until we found a town. I agreed because what else was there to do? We grabbed a small flashlight and walked down the road. For a while, it was just the two of us, our footsteps too loud in the silence. Then we saw the fox. It lay on the side of the road, eyes clouded, mouth slightly open, but there was no blood. No injury. It looked like it had just stopped living. A few minutes later, we saw a raccoon in the same position, then a deer. All untouched, all wrong. Luke stopped suddenly. He pointed at the fox. "Same earmark," he said. "Same white spot. That's the same fox." My heart thudded painfully, but we kept walking, pretending maybe we were imagining things. Then we saw the fox again, and again, like we were walking on a loop. The road didn't change. The same curves repeated, the same branch shapes above us. Luke whispered, "We're not getting anywhere." His voice shook. We turned around to walk back to the car. Except now the road behind us looked different. The turns were sharper. The trees leaned at strange angles, like they had been rearranged. I noticed carvings on the bark, long scratches that formed symbols I didn't recognize. Circles inside triangles, crooked lines, spirals that made my eyes hurt. Then we heard the screaming. It came from far away, echoing through the valley, stretching long and thin like someone screaming while falling. It repeated, the exact same way each time, like a sound stuck on repeat. It didn't rise or fade, it just looped. A human scream shouldn't sound like that. We moved faster. Adrenaline took over. When the flashlight hit something bright ahead, we saw a small scenic overlook on the edge of the road. A wooden railing, a faded map sign, and a family of 4 standing there staring into the valley. I wanted to call out, but something stopped me. They stood too still. Their posture was stiff, unnatural. Then the scream echoed again. The youngest child slowly turned his head and looked back at us, his eyes wide and empty, like he knew something he couldn't say. The parents didn't move at all. We ran. Branches slapped my face and arms. The flashlight swung wildly, then fell from Luke's hand and hit the ground. He yelled once, a sharp sound that cut off too fast. I grabbed his arm but felt only air. I called his name again and again, but the trees returned silence. I didn't stop. My legs moved like they belonged to someone else. When I burst into a clearing, I almost collapsed. Our car was there, but not where we left it. The passenger door hung open. My bag was gone, and deep scratches were carved across the hood. You brought it back. The words were crooked, uneven, carved the same way the road sign letters were. I didn't understand what it meant, but it made my skin crawl. My hands trembled on the door handle. Then the car engine started by itself, headlights flashing on like someone invisible sat in the driver's seat. I didn't question it. I slid behind the wheel and slammed the door. The engine roared even though I didn't touch the gas. The steering wheel jerked like the car wanted to move before I did. I hit the pedal anyway, desperate to leave. The road flew by in a blur. The trees pulled back. The engine screamed like it was being forced to run faster than it could. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe much either. Eventually, the road widened again. Lights appeared. Houses. A town. I pulled into the first building I saw. A tiny sheriff's station with dirty windows and a single flickering light. I stumbled inside, shaking and cold. I told them everything, every detail, every word. They searched for Luke. They found nothing. No tire marks. No clearing. No overlook. No sign of Willow's Rest. They said people get lost in those woods all the time. They said fear makes your memory messy. They said the mind fills in blanks. But the scratches on the car didn't come from my imagination. 3 days later, I picked up the car from the small repair garage the sheriff recommended. The mechanic looked nervous when he handed me the keys. He said something had scraped the metal so deep it bent the hood frame. He asked what happened. I said I didn't know. He said he had seen symbols like the ones scratched on the car before, carved into trees on an old trail near a place locals refused to visit. I asked where. His face went pale. He said he couldn't remember. I drove away and never looked back. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike. I don't drive near thick woods. And when I hear distant echoes at night, long dragging sounds that don't change pitch, I tell myself it's the wind, but part of me knows it isn't the wind. Something followed me out of those mountains, something I didn't mean to bring back. I never expected a simple road trip to shake me the way it did, the kind of thing that burrows under your skin and never leaves. It started on a late September afternoon, the sun dipping behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. My name's Marcus, and I work as a wildlife ranger here in western North Carolina. I moved here 3 years ago, thinking it would be peaceful, thinking the forests and quiet roads would help me escape the chaos of city life. But peace doesn't live here. The mountains hold something else, something you feel more than see, a weight that sits in your chest if you let yourself notice it. I had a long weekend off, no calls, no emergencies, nothing demanding my attention, and I wanted to clear my mind. Driving has always been my escape. I like the hum of tires on asphalt, the steady rhythm of the road beneath me. It's honest and predictable in a world that isn't. That day, I found myself scrolling through an old contact list, looking for someone I used to know back in college, someone I hadn't seen in years. His name was Dean, a photography major obsessed with abandoned buildings and forest landscapes. We'd met at a festival, bonded over cameras and bad coffee, and then life had pulled us apart. A message popped up from him, simple and casual. "Hey Marcus, been a while. Free for a drive?" I hesitated for a second, double-checked the number. It was his, though slightly different than I remembered. Something about it felt off, but I ignored the hesitation. I told myself I wanted to see a familiar face, to feel something different for a few hours. I picked him up at the small bus terminal in Bryson City, a sleepy town tucked against the river. I almost didn't recognize him. His hair had grown long and matted, beard uneven, coat worn thin and dirty. His boots were caked with dried mud, and his backpack sagged with what looked like weeks of travel. The smell hit me first, a mix of damp earth and sweat. I swallowed my unease and waved him into my Jeep. He smiled, a strange, wide smile, like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He mentioned a trail near the Tennessee border, a hidden spot he'd discovered that supposedly had the most untouched scenery. It wasn't on any map, barely a mark on my GPS, but I'd driven rougher terrain before. I agreed, though a knot of doubt had begun to form in my stomach. We drove past the last gas station, past the weak cell signal, and into the dirt roads that twisted through the mountains like veins. Fog was settling, thick and white, swallowing the trees and making the headlights look like pale lanterns cutting through smoke. We stopped at what looked like a collapsed barn, leaning at a dangerous angle with beams jutting at impossible angles. The trail was little more than a slit through the brush, overgrown with brambles and shadows. He stepped forward, taking the lead, his movements confident, almost too confident. I followed quietly, keeping my ears open for every snap of a branch, every whisper of wind. He talked the whole time, rambling about jobs he'd had, girlfriends who left, people who didn't understand him but never directly to me. When we crossed a rusted, abandoned mill piece, my skin prickled. The air was thicker here, heavier. He turned and asked, "If someone turned on you out here, what would you do?" His tone was casual, like talking about the weather, but the words hit me like a cold wind. I kept my voice steady. "Stay calm, keep my eyes open, have a way out." He nodded, then moved on, silent now. We reached a clearing where a half-collapsed structure stood. Moss covered every beam, and a fire ring sat in the center, stones blackened with age. He dropped his pack and laid out a coil of rope, a hatchet, and 2 knives, one serrated, one long. He did it deliberately, carefully. I unclipped my own folding knife and placed it beside the food I'd packed. He glanced at it and back at me, his eyes unreadable. He picked up the axe and disappeared into the woods. I stayed, listening, heart hammering. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and then silence. When he returned, his arms were full of branches, the axe still in his grip. He looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." I tensed, thinking he meant the knives, the isolation, the unease. Slowly he stepped closer, and for a heartbeat I imagined the worst. Then he said, "Maybe we should hug." I shook my head. "We need to get the fire going first." He didn't argue, just backed off, muttering to himself as he went into the brush again. The hike back was slow. He rambled half to himself, about being used, about betrayal, about people only calling when they want something. I stayed ahead, making sure I always had a barrier of space between us and the tree line. When we reached the trailhead, a few families were loading kayaks into a trailer. Relief washed over me, and I didn't bother hiding it. I refused to drive him back. He just nodded, silent, eyes dark, unreadable. I got in my Jeep and drove until the road widened and traffic appeared. I parked at a gas station, locked the doors, and sat with the engine running for an hour, heart still racing. That night, I blocked his number, though I didn't delete the messages. Instead, I called someone who knew him better, explained everything, knives, isolation, the odd questions. Weeks later, I got news that he was in therapy, on medication, trying to get better. But the memories stayed. The fog, the silent forest, the half-collapsed mill, the knives laid out with deliberate precision. And the thing that really lingered was the weight of knowing how close I'd been to someone unraveling completely, how easy it was to step into danger without realizing it. I still drive those roads sometimes, alone, headlights cutting through fog, the mountains silent witnesses. I've never picked up anyone like that again, never will. That same foggy road sometimes loops on itself, I swear. I see the same mailbox again and again, passing like a ghost. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, I hear tapping on the roof of my parked Jeep, and there's never anyone there. Once, I hit something on a back road, stepped out, and the only mark was a deep handprint in the dirt, disappearing as soon as I blinked. I've learned that the mountains remember. They keep what's left behind, what's lost, what's broken, and if you're not careful, you become a part of it. My name's Caleb. I work as a freelance surveyor, the kind of job that keeps me traveling through strange little places that seem to sit outside of time. I grew up in a small town near Oak Hollow, where the woods were thick enough to hide in but never truly wild. My father used to take me camping when I was young, teaching me to read the land, to listen for running water, to feel direction in the wind. I thought I knew the forest, thought I understood its rhythm, its rules. But last October, I learned that some places don't want to be understood. Some places want you to leave. It started simple. A long weekend, a trip with 2 friends I'd known since high school, Travis and Devin. Travis had found something online, a post on an old hiking forum buried under years of dead links. It talked about a forgotten route through the Appalachian backcountry, near a town called Pine Bend. The post had no coordinates, just rough directions and a warning scribbled in caps: "Don't take the Ridgewater Cut after sundown." Travis laughed when he read it, said it sounded like the perfect adventure. Devin and I weren't as sure, but when Travis got an idea stuck in his head, It was easier to go along than argue. We left early Friday morning, throwing our gear in the back of Devon's truck. The drive took hours, winding through hills that grew sharper and lonelier the farther we went. By noon, we hit Pine Bend, a scattering of old houses, a diner, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. As soon as we pulled in, something felt wrong. The streets were quiet, too quiet. A couple of people stood outside the diner, not eating, not talking, just watching us. When we stepped out to stretch our legs, their conversation stopped completely. I smiled and nodded, got nothing back but blank faces. Travis went into the gas station for directions. The attendant was an old man with eyes the color of storm clouds and skin like worn leather. Travis asked about the Ridgewater cut. The man froze, then slowly shook his head. Said the road was closed, washed out years ago. He leaned closer and whispered something that made the hair rise on my arms. That road hasn't been open for 20 years. Don't go near it. Travis just laughed when he came back to the truck, said the old guy was trying to spook us. But when I looked at the map, the road he marked didn't exist anymore. Devon suggested we turn back, maybe find a real trail. Travis grinned and started the engine. What's the fun in that? The further we drove, the rougher the path became. Asphalt turned to gravel, gravel turned to dirt, and then even the dirt vanished beneath a carpet of dead leaves. The trees crowded close, their branches knitting together overhead like they were trying to shut us out. When we finally reached an old rusted gate hanging open, Travis stopped the truck. The silence that followed when he killed the engine was heavy, pressing. No birds, no crickets, not even wind. Just the slow sound of our breathing. We hiked in from there. The air smelled of damp moss and cold earth. The trail was little more than a faint indentation through the undergrowth, winding deeper into a forest that felt older than the world. After 2 hours, my legs ached, and I realized something strange. There were no animal tracks, no droppings, nothing alive besides us. The forest wasn't empty, though. It felt like it was watching. When we reached a clearing near dusk, we decided to set up camp. The space was wrong somehow, a near-perfect circle where nothing grew except brittle grass and a few blackened stumps. Travis dropped his pack and said it was perfect. Devon muttered that it felt too quiet. We made a fire that barely caught, the wood hissing and smoking instead of burning. Every spark died too soon, as if the air itself didn't want it there. We ate canned beans and jerky. Travis passed around a flask. The whiskey tasted metallic, and the air seemed thicker after each sip. The moon rose pale through the trees, and by the time the fire burned low, the forest was pitch black beyond the flickering ring of light. Devon said he heard footsteps, slow and steady, circling just out of sight. Travis laughed again, told him it was probably deer, but there hadn't been any deer all day. I didn't sleep much. Around 2:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing. Not my own, slow, shallow breaths right outside my tent. I froze, listening. Then came a soft scrape, like someone dragging their fingers across the fabric. My hand closed around my flashlight. I clicked it on, heart hammering. Nothing, just trees, shadowed and endless. But I knew something had been there. In the morning, none of us talked about it. Travis acted normal, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Devon was pale, hands shaking slightly when he packed up. We decided to follow the ridge Travis had seen on the satellite image before we lost signal. The climb was rough, but the view at the top was breathtaking. Rolling hills fading into mist, untouched and endless. For a while, we forgot how strange everything felt. Then, as we started back down, we realized we'd lost the trail. We retraced our steps, but every turn led somewhere new. The trees looked wrong. Their bark had strange marks carved into them, triangles, spirals, shapes that seemed to shift when I stared too long. Devon pulled out his compass. The needle spun wildly. The sun was in the wrong place. We were lost. We walked until we stumbled into a clearing again, but not the same one. This one had a single dead tree in the center, stripped of bark. Its branches hung with bits of twine and small wooden figures shaped like people. Some had tiny stones where the eyes should be. Some had nothing, Travis muttered something about local superstition, tried to laugh, but the sound broke halfway. Devin whispered that we should leave. We turned back the way we came and, somehow, ended up at our original campsite. Only one thing had changed. One of the logs around the fire pit had been moved, rotated just slightly. We packed fast, but the sun was already slipping behind the hills. The fire refused to burn again no matter what we tried. Devin sat with his hatchet across his lap, eyes darting into the dark. Travis hummed under his breath, some old tune I didn't recognize. I lay in my tent, knife in hand, waiting for dawn. Around 3:42 a.m., the footsteps came again. Slow, deliberate, then a whisper, too faint to understand, curling through the air like smoke. The firelight flared once, then died completely. I held my breath. The whisper moved behind my tent, closer. A shadow fell across the thin fabric, long and wrong, stretching higher than any person should be. My flashlight flickered. When it steadied, the shadow was gone. By morning, Travis was different. Quiet, distant. He said he hadn't heard anything, but he kept glancing into the trees like he expected something to step out. Devin and I wanted to leave. Travis insisted we go deeper, said he wanted to find the old road again. We argued until Devin shouted that he was done. That's when we found the figure. It was lying beside Travis's pack, a crude doll made of sticks bound with red thread, its head a knot of twigs. The thread cut deep into the wood like veins. None of us had seen it before. Travis burned it without a word. The smoke smelled sweet, like sap and rot. We packed and left. The trail seemed clearer this time, almost guiding us downhill. I thought we were safe until I saw the carvings, fresh ones on the trees near the edge of the forest. 3 figures, one taller, 2 shorter. Devin didn't look. Travis kept walking. I stared too long. When we reached the truck, the woods went still again. Travis started the engine, and as the tires hit the road, I looked back. The gate was closed. I swear it had been opened before. On the drive home, none of us spoke. Travis dropped us off and kept driving. I haven't seen him since. Devin stopped answering my messages after a week. His phone disconnected. I told myself it was just the woods, just isolation playing tricks. But then, 2 nights later, I woke to a sound outside my window. The same slow breathing I'd heard in that clearing. When I looked, there was nothing. Just the reflection of my face in the glass. A month later, I went back to Pine Bend needing to know. The town looked smaller somehow. The diner was empty. The gas station was closed, boarded up, but the pump lights still glowed faintly, like fireflies caught in glass. On the counter inside, covered in dust, sat a paper bag with a faded note tucked beneath it. It said, "Do not stay here after sunset." I left before the sun touched the hills. As I drove away, I caught sight of someone standing by the tree line in my mirror. Tall, still, watching. Now, every time I drive at night, I catch glimpses of that shape in the headlights. Sometimes I hear footsteps on the gravel behind my house when the wind dies. I tell myself it's just my imagination. But some nights, around 2:17 a.m., I wake to find mud footprints by the door. 3 sets. 1 tall, 2 shorter. My name is Dom. I am 32, and I work as a mechanic. Someone who should never be afraid of engines or deserted highways. But this trip taught me fear I never asked for. I grew up with wrenches and oil stains on my hands, raised by a father who believed every machine had a soul and every mountain road had a memory. He used to take me on long drives through twisting valleys and fog-covered ridges, never needing a map because he said the Appalachians talked to him in their own way. I believed him when I was a kid, then forgot about his stories when life got busier and louder. But last fall, work was crushing me. Bills were stacking up, and everything felt heavier than it needed to be. I needed quiet, a wide road, and time to think. So I packed a small duffel, tuned up my old blue sedan, and planned a route through Tennessee and North Carolina using roads people rarely drove anymore. The kind of roads where you can go miles without seeing a house or even a gas station. I left before sunrise, the sky still dark with a thin smear of gray on the edge. The air was cold, sharper than I expected, and the world felt still in a way that made me think maybe this trip really could reset my mind. For the first few hours, everything felt peaceful. The mountains rose like dark silhouettes around me as the sun finally climbed up, lighting the hills with orange slants of morning. I had no destination, just movement, just miles rolling under my tires. By noon, I crossed into Tennessee and passed through a little roadside town called Weaver's Bend. It looked old, but lived in enough, with a gas station, a diner, and a few houses scattered along the road. I stopped for fuel and bought a coffee, then kept driving deeper into the hills. The first strange thing happened about an hour later on a narrow stretch of road where the trees curved overhead like an archway. I saw an elderly woman sitting on a wooden guardrail, a faded blue coat hanging off her shoulders and a torn brown suitcase beside her feet. She didn't put out her thumb, didn't wave, didn't even look up as I passed her. She just sat still, staring at the forest across from her like she was waiting for someone or something. I drove past without thinking, but something about her lingered in my mind longer than it should have. Maybe it was the way she sat perfectly upright, or how her gray hair fell neatly down her back like it had been brushed moments ago. She didn't look lost or tired, just still. 2 hours later, I passed another small town called Willow Patch, and the second strange thing happened. As I slowed down near a four-way stop, I saw the same elderly woman sitting on a bench outside a laundromat. Same coat, same suitcase, same posture, her head turned toward the road like she was listening for a sound only she could hear. I nearly slammed on the brakes. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. The road had no major exits, no buses, and no traffic. Even if she had driven herself, she would have needed to pass me at some point, but I hadn't seen a single car in hours. Yet there she was, calm and silent like she had been waiting for me. I kept moving, pretending the chill running down my spine was just the cold air seeping in through the vents. By afternoon, clouds rolled in thick and low, and the forest around me got darker. The road turned rougher, cracked in places, with moss creeping from the edges. I stopped at a tiny local market before entering the national forest stretch that had no services for nearly 50 miles. Inside, the place smelled like wood smoke and old dust. A man behind the counter watched me the whole time I grabbed snacks and water, his eyes tired but alert. When I approached the counter, he stepped closer than necessary and spoke with a slow, serious voice that made my stomach tighten. He reached out with a hand scarred and rough. "Let me bless your car before the hills wake up," he said, without saying it like a threat or a warning, just a simple truth he expected me to accept. I didn't know what to do. There was something unsettling in his eyes, something that looked like worry mixed with fear. Before I could answer, he placed his palm on my shoulder and whispered a few quiet words I couldn't understand. They sounded old, like a song someone forgot how to sing. He nodded once, then stepped back. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just paid, walked outside, and drove away with my heart pounding too hard in my chest. Fog crawled onto the road as I headed deeper into the forest. It wasn't the soft kind of fog you see at dawn. This fog felt thick, heavy, like it held weight. The trees grew darker, taller, their branches twisted like knuckles reaching down. I turned on my headlights, but the beams barely cut through the haze. As I moved farther from the nearest town, the silence inside my car grew louder. The road ahead felt unfamiliar, even though the map said I was still on the right track. The air grew colder, stubbornly cold, as if I had climbed thousands of feet without noticing. Somewhere around the 50th mile marker, my stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since morning. When a glowing diner sign appeared ahead in the fog, I felt relieved. The building sat alone at the edge of the trees, its neon light flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. Inside, the place looked clean, warm, even inviting. A waitress smiled at me and guided me to a booth. She moved smoothly, her steps quiet, her eyes never blinking too long. The other customers sat in small groups at tables, all of them dressed differently, all of them talking softly among themselves. Everything seemed almost normal until I noticed the scars. Every single person in that diner had the same thin, pale mark across the side of their necks, a perfect horizontal line like something had sliced them but healed without pain. Some had it hidden under collars or scarves, but it was there. I sat frozen, staring at them one by one, pretending I was looking at the menu. The waitress placed a glass of water in front of me, her hand steady and calm. As she leaned closer, her hair shifted and revealed the same mark, thin and pale. I felt a tightness in my chest. Something was deeply wrong here, wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I didn't order, I didn't drink. I simply mumbled something about needing to stretch my legs and forced a small smile, then stood up and walked out as casually as I could. The moment the door closed behind me, I ran to my car, heart slamming inside my chest like fists against a door. I drove away fast, the diner shrinking in my rearview mirror until the fog swallowed it whole. Night settled in quicker than it should have. The sky turned black, the kind of black that made the world feel empty. I checked the clock. It was only 7:45 p.m., but it felt like midnight. My headlights flickered once, then steadied. The forest around me grew darker, thicker, and the fog drifted across the road like moving shadows. About 30 minutes later, something appeared on the shoulder ahead. My heart dropped. It was the elderly hitchhiker again. The same woman, same suitcase, same coat. She stood this time, facing the road like she had been expecting me, like she knew I would pass here. Her face lifted slowly as my car approached. She didn't wave. She didn't blink. She just watched me with eyes too dark to read. I pressed down on the gas without thinking and sped past her. My hands shook on the steering wheel. This was impossible. She wasn't a person anymore. She couldn't be. The road curved sharply, climbing uphill. The fog thickened so much that I had to slow down or risk sliding off the edge. My breathing grew tight, shallow. The blessing the man had given me echoed in my mind, the strange words he whispered, the look on his face. As I reached the top of the ridge, something tapped the back passenger window. It wasn't a branch, it wasn't gravel. It was a slow, deliberate tapping, 3 short knocks like someone politely asking to be let in. My whole body froze. I kept my eyes on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The knocking came again, louder this time, like fingers dragging down the glass. I didn't look. I couldn't. My chest burned with fear, my mind racing. Was she there? Standing outside the moving car? Walking beside me on the ridge? I pressed the accelerator harder, the tires whining against the pavement. The fog whipped by. The trees blurred into dark streaks. The knocking stopped, but a new sound replaced it, something soft and steady, like breathing close behind me, not inside the car. Not outside, somewhere in between. I gripped the wheel tighter and forced myself to stay focused on the narrow road. I told myself I was imagining it, that fear was twisting sounds, that I just needed to reach the next town. But then I heard my name, not spoken aloud, not whispered. It slid into my thoughts like someone had leaned into my mind and placed the sound directly inside it. A calm voice, gentle but wrong. It echoed in a place thoughts should never come from. Dom. My heart slammed against my ribs. I bit down on my breath. My entire body shivered. I kept driving, shaking so hard the wheel trembled. The road stretched endlessly, like it was looping under me, like I wasn't moving at all. Fog wrapped around the car, swirling like hands. Shadows shifted between the trees in ways that didn't make sense. Then, just when I felt like the road would never end, the fog began to thin. The air grew clearer. The trees spaced out. A distant glow appeared ahead, golden and warm like a town. Relief flooded me. I didn't care where I was. I would stop, rest, breathe, anything to escape whatever had been following me on that ridge. But as I approached the edge of the town, I saw something that made every muscle in my body turn cold again. Standing under the flickering street lamp right beside the welcome sign was the elderly hitchhiker. The same coat, the same suitcase, the same unmoving posture. She stared straight ahead as if waiting for the next car, or maybe just mine. But this time, something was different. Her head tilted slightly as I slowed, and for the first time, Her lips parted in a small, thin smile. The mark on her neck was clear now, the same pale scar every diner customer had worn. I pressed the gas without thinking and drove straight through the town, not stopping for lights, not looking at houses, not slowing for anything. I didn't look back until the buildings vanished behind the trees. The forest swallowed the road again, but the fog did not return. The air felt lighter. The silence faded, replaced by the distant hum of insects and the rustle of leaves, normal sounds I had begged for hours earlier. When I finally reached a main highway, I stopped at the first gas station I saw. I parked under bright lights, locked the doors, and sat there shaking. My mind spun with everything I'd seen, every impossible thing I couldn't explain. I reached toward the rearview mirror, hesitant but needing to know if anything was behind me. The back seat was empty. But on the outside of the back passenger window, faint but clear in the reflection, were 3 pale fingerprints, long, thin, and pressed against the glass from the outside. I wiped them off with my sleeve, drove home, and never took that route again. I still fix cars for a living, still drive the same sedan, but I stay on highways now. I stay where people are. I stay where the hills cannot wake up around me. And sometimes, even now when I drive alone at night, I check my mirrors more than I should. I look at the side of the road. I look at empty places and wonder if she is there, waiting, sitting, watching. I try not to think about the voice in my head or the scar on her neck or the way she appeared miles apart on the same day. But deep down, I know the truth I will never say out loud. She wasn't trying to get a ride. She was trying to follow me home. My name is Rowan, 32, born in a flat river town where nothing ever changes, where I learned design on an old laptop that overheated every 10 minutes. I built a life from scraps, freelancing logos and posters and anything people would pay for, all from the tiny apartment I rented above a bakery. I was the kind of person who felt nervous answering the door. Real chaos was never part of my world. But my partner Mara lived inside chaos every night. She worked as an emergency nurse in a rotating night schedule, sometimes days, sometimes nights, sometimes both in the same week, and I watched her slowly fade and harden at the same time. We were together but barely touching lives, like 2 people walking side by side down different hallways. When she said we needed to drive somewhere quiet and disappear for a bit, I didn't question it. I wasn't brave, but I was tired, and tired people agree to anything that looks like escape. We weren't planning a vacation. It was more like running away. Mara found a campsite deep in the Appalachian backroads, somewhere near rural Virginia, but not exactly pinned to any real town, just a red marker. Someone dropped online, a spot not on maps, not named, not recommended by any park service. She said a patient once mentioned it, something about an old mining trail that nobody uses anymore, a place so isolated it didn't even get tourists. It sounded reckless, but she looked like someone drowning who had found a rope to cling to, so I said, sure, let's go, even though my chest tightened at the idea of being that far from people. We packed stupidly, rushing like kids pretending to be outdoorsy. One oversized tent with bent poles, a stove we'd never tried, vegetables we couldn't cut because the knife was so dull it barely scratched the skin, mismatched blankets and shoes not meant for trails. It was like we wanted to prove we weren't soft, that we could still break away from our screens and routines without falling apart. We drove south, passing small towns that looked half asleep, passing gas stations that were barely holding themselves up, passing groupings of houses that had more rust than paint. People stared at us when we stopped for snacks, long, quiet looks that didn't feel friendly or curious, more like they were waiting to see if we'd keep going. At one old roadside cafe, a man in a hat too wide for his head asked where we were headed. When we mentioned the mountain road, he froze for a moment, then said that stretch wasn't for outsiders. I thought he was joking until another man nearby whispered the same thing to his friend, repeating not for outsiders like a warning passed between them for years. Mara brushed it off, calling it mountain folk superstition, but something in the man's eyes stuck with me. Later, at a gas station farther down the road, a thin stranger with a crooked smile stepped up to me as I pumped fuel. He asked if we were heading into the ridges beyond the interstate. When I nodded, he tried to buy our car on the spot, offering cash he didn't seem to actually have. When I said no, he went stiff and muttered that we wouldn't survive that road. The way he said survive made my stomach lurch. I wanted to turn back, but Mara was already unlocking the passenger door. We kept driving. Hours later, the asphalt gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to a dirt road that felt old, older than anything we had the right to use. A road carved into the mountains like someone forced a scar into the earth. Trees pressed in close, tall enough to block the sun even in the afternoon, turning the world dark and cold. When we finally stopped, it wasn't at a real parking area, just a patch of ground beside a gate swallowed by vines. The trail ahead wasn't really a trail either. It was a narrow path, just wide enough for one person at a time, leading upward in slow switchbacks. The deeper we walked, the more the forest felt like a tunnel of wood and shadow. The air grew heavy, thicker somehow, and a strange silence hovered over everything. Not peaceful silence, not the kind people want, but something tight and watchful. I kept glancing behind us because I felt like someone was stepping just out of sight, matching our rhythm exactly. But every time I looked, the woods stood still, quiet, waiting. It took several hours before the ridge opened up to a small clearing. It wasn't flat, but it was the only place we could fit a tent. There were no signs of human life, no fire pit, no trash, not even footprints. The forest below dropped into a hollow where the light looked sickly, like it had trouble reaching the ground. Mara set her bag down and said it was perfect. I didn't think so, but we were already here. Setting up the tent took forever. The poles bent in weird angles. The ground refused to stay level, and we kept arguing softly about which rock might stabilize the corner without ripping the fabric. By the time we cooked, the sky was turning dark. Our food tasted like warm water, but we forced excitement, telling each other it wasn't that bad. The truth was, we were exhausted, but neither of us wanted to ruin the trip. We sat by a small fire watching the flames shift. But the silence bothered me. Forests are supposed to have noise, bugs or birds or something, but there was nothing. No wind, no rustling, no distant movement. Just the soft crack of burning wood and our own breathing. I told Mara it felt too quiet. She said that was the whole point, to find a place that didn't demand anything from us. We went to bed early. She fell asleep instantly. I lay awake staring at the thin fabric above me. The darkness pressed against the tent like it had weight. After an hour of fighting sleep, I finally heard something outside. Leaves shifting, slow and steady, step by step in a rhythm made by a person, not an animal. I froze. The steps moved closer, then paused near us, then shifted again, circling. Mara kept snoring softly, unaware. I didn't move until I forced myself to believe it was just a deer. Eventually, sleep dragged me under. The next morning, the world looked the same except for one thing. A long, smooth line carved into the dirt about a few feet from the tent. Not footprints, not tire tracks, but a drag mark like something had slid heavy across the ground. When I pointed it out, Mara said maybe I dragged my boot, but I knew I hadn't. Still, I didn't argue. We spent the day exploring the ridge with a careful distance between us and the hollow below. The deeper we walked, the older the forest felt. Branches curled like fingers, moss grew thick over rocks, and the air smelled stale like something had been sealed here too long. We found the rock structure late in the afternoon. A wide outcrop broken in the middle, shaped like a mouth fallen open. Inside its shallow cave sat a neat spiral of bones, white and arranged with too much care. Bones from small animals and one thin spine that didn't look familiar. Mara stepped back fast and said we were done exploring. We walked back to camp without speaking. That night, sleep didn't come at all. I held the flashlight in my hand because I didn't trust anything. Around 2:17 a.m., the steps returned, circling us again but farther out. I clicked my flashlight. It didn't turn on. I opened it and checked the batteries. They were new, but the light stayed dead. Then I heard whispering beneath us, muffled like someone talking from under the soil, words thick and slurred like they were pushing through dirt. My skin crawled. I stared at the ground as it shifted slightly beneath the tent, a soft rise under the fabric, like something underneath was moving upward, pressing through the earth. The bulge moved under Mara's legs. She woke up with a gasp. I grabbed her hand with one hand and the useless knife with the other. Before the ground could rise again, we tore out of the tent and ran barefoot through the trees, branches slicing our arms and legs. We sprinted until the forest thinned, and I saw the strip of orange tape we tied earlier as a trail marker. We stopped there, breathing hard, hearts pounding, listening. Nothing followed. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. At sunrise, we forced ourselves to go back for our things. The tent was untouched. Our belongings were fine. But the ground beneath the tent looked smooth again, like nothing had pushed from below. The only sign that anything happened was a fresh spiral carved into a nearby birch tree, deep grooves curling inward just like the bone spiral in the rock cave. We packed without speaking. Halfway down the mountain road, Mara finally asked if we were going to tell anyone. I said no. She said good. We didn't speak again until we reached a small town at the edge of the ridge. At the old cafe where we stopped for breakfast, I overheard two locals whispering harshly at a back table. One said he got the next out-of-state visitor. The other argued that the last one didn't count because they left too soon. Their voices dropped lower, then one of them said something that made my spine tighten. He said the ridge was hungry again. Before we left town, a police officer waved us down at a checkpoint, staring inside our car like he was counting us. When he finally let us go, he said the same words the cafe men had said days earlier. This road isn't for outsiders. His voice was flat, rehearsed, like he'd said that line 1,000 times. We drove faster after that. I don't know what lives in those hills, what waits under that soil, what follows people who don't belong. But sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night in my small apartment far away from those mountains, I hear something that sounds like soil shifting just beneath the floorboards. Sometimes it feels like the ground remembers us. And sometimes I feel like something followed me home. I remember the silence first, the kind that hums deep in your bones and makes every breath feel too loud. It happened when I was hollow inside, not just sat empty like someone had scooped out everything that made me feel alive. I just walked away from a relationship that ended like a fire dying in the rain, leaving only smoke and cold air behind. For weeks, I barely spoke to anyone. I went to work at the auto shop, nodded through small talk, and came home to a quiet apartment that smelled like oil and dust. Then one evening, my friend Clara called. Her voice sounded like it came from another world. She said, "Let's vanish for a bit. No plans, no people, no reminders. Just the open road." I said yes before she finished. We didn't plan much, because that was the point. She tossed her camping gear into the back of her faded red SUV. I packed a duffel with the basics, and we filled a cooler with gas station food that could survive a few days in the mountains. Our route was loose head south through the Appalachian hills, follow the old scenic roads, stop wherever the air felt right. Clara called it our reset trip. To me, it felt like a last chance to breathe. The first few days blurred together like fog on a windshield. The world shrank down to the rhythm of tires on asphalt and Clara's soft humming over a playlist we'd made in college. We'd stop at overlooks, eat lunch on the hood, hike through trails that smelled like pine and rain. At night, we'd camp near streams where the sound of running water was enough to drown out our thoughts. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry or broken. I wasn't much of anything, but that was better than before. On the fourth day, everything changed. We'd been driving through a narrow stretch of the Blue Ridge side roads when Clara pointed out a thin gravel path cutting through the trees. No sign. No name. Just a forgotten trail disappearing into the woods. She grinned like she always did when trouble called. "Let's see where it goes." I should have said no. We turned anyway. The road was barely wide enough for one car. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The kind of quiet that eats sound whole. No birds, no wind, not even the hum of insects. Just the crunch of gravel under the tires and the whisper of branches brushing against the mirrors. After 20 minutes, we lost signal. No GPS, no service, just the woods. We figured it had to loop back eventually. It always did on our other trips. But this one didn't feel like the others. The sun dipped lower, and the road narrowed again until the branches scraped the roof. Clara leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Then she saw it, a sign nailed crooked to a tree. The wood was rotted, the red paint peeling. It read, "Camp Mercy Falls, 1 mile." She laughed, nervous. Mercy Falls. Sounds like a horror movie title. I joked back, but it came out thin. We drove on. The road ended in a clearing, a circle carved out of the forest. There was an old fire pit filled with gray ash and 2 rotting picnic tables half swallowed by moss. No cabins, no signs of people, no sound. I stepped out of the car, and the air felt wrong, too heavy, too still, like the woods were holding their breath. Clara got out too, slowly, scanning the tree line. "Do you hear that?" She whispered. I listened. Nothing, not even the echo of our own breathing. We should have turned around right then, but the light was fading fast, and the thought of backing down that narrow road in the dark made us both hesitate. We set up camp fast, tossing the tent together like it could shield us from whatever this place was. Dinner was instant soup, eaten quietly beside a weak fire that made the shadows look sharper instead of softer. Around 9:30 p.m., the first sound came. A crack, not from the fire, from somewhere behind the trees. Clara froze. "You heard that, right?" "Yeah." We sat there listening, hearts pounding in sync. Another sound came, a slow, deliberate step over dry leaves. Then another. I stood and tossed a few more branches onto the fire, pretending that the light would help. The woods stayed dark, too dark. After a long silence, Clara said, low and steady, "We're sleeping in the car." We didn't argue. We threw our things inside, locked the doors, and leaned the seats back. The air felt tight, heavy with something we couldn't name. Clara tried to laugh it off. "Probably a deer," she said. Neither of us believed it. I watched the flames outside flicker lower until the clearing was swallowed by black. Somewhere around 2:17 a.m., I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. Tap, pause, pause. Tap, soft, soft, gentle, like fingers brushing glass. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I realized it was coming from the back window, right behind Clara's head. I turned slowly, my breath catching. There was a handprint, faint, smudged, pressed against the inside of the glass. Inside. I couldn't move. My pulse roared in my ears. I reached out, touched Clara's arm, and whispered, "Don't move." She turned anyway. Her face drained white. We didn't scream. We didn't talk. I started the car, foot slamming on the gas, gravel flying as we tore down that road like something was chasing us. The trees blurred into streaks of shadow and light. Every shape on the roadside looked like a person watching. Every bend looked like it would never end. By the time we hit pavement again, the sky was paling gray with dawn. The first building we found was an old gas station, faded paint, half-broken sign, the kind of place that looks closed even when it's open. A neon open flickered weakly in the window. We stumbled inside, pale and shaking. The man behind the counter didn't look surprised. "You two coming from Mercy Falls?" he asked, voice slow. We froze. We froze! "You know it?" Clara said. He nodded. "Used to be a camp up there. Closed down after some kids and counselors vanished one summer. Rangers cleared it out, or tried to. Guess they didn't seal every road. What happened to them?" I asked. The man looked up, his eyes dull like pond water. "Some places don't forget. We left without another word." We drove for hours before finding a small roadside motel, the kind with peeling paint and humming lights. The parking lot was empty. The clerk didn't even ask for ID, just slid a key across the counter with a look that said, we weren't the first ones to arrive shaking from those woods. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft tapping, like it was under the floorboards. The next morning, Clara was gone. Her duffel was there, her jacket on the chair, here, jacket on the chair, the car keys on the nightstand, but no note, no sign she'd left willingly. I ran outside, shouting her name until my throat burned. The motel clerk came out from the office, watching me with blank eyes. "You sure you came here alone?" he asked. I couldn't answer. I drove back toward the highway, retracing the route, searching every turnout, every rest stop. At one rest area, I pulled over to use the payphone, but all the booths were smashed, glass shattered, each one spray painted with the same words in red, "Turn back." My hands shook. I got back in the car, engine idling too loud in the empty lot. That night, I stopped at another motel, a small one off an unmarked road. The sign said closed, but one room had the curtains slightly open, a light flickering inside. Shadows moved behind it. I knocked, hoping maybe Clara had found her way there. No one answered. But when I looked closer, I saw something behind the curtain, just a shape, standing too still, facing the window, watching me. I ran back to the car. By dawn, I reached another campground, hoping for help. But when I got out, the place was empty. Tents half-zipped, fires still warm, food laid out like people had just stepped away a minute ago. But there were no people, no birds, no sound, only the woods. Watching, waiting. I left again. Back home, I spent days searching for Mercy Falls. No maps, no news, no records, nothing. Like it had been erased. Then one morning I went out to wash the car. When I wiped down the back window, my hand stopped. There it was again. That same print, faint, damp. On the inside of the glass, I wiped it off. The next day, it came back. And this time, it wasn't just one, there were two, side by side. I was driving through the Appalachian Mountains when it started. The rain had been following me since morning, and by the time I reached the narrow road that twisted between the ridges, the sky had turned the color of wet ash. My name's Owen, and I don't talk about this often. Some nights I still wake up shaking, thinking I can hear that sound again, the slow breathing and the static. I tell myself it wasn't real, that I was just tired, but every time I close my eyes, I see that place. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. I'd taken 2 weeks off from my job at a small auto repair shop in Knoxville. I wanted quiet, mountains, the kind of peace that only comes from being somewhere nobody can reach you. I had a notebook, my camera, and an old blue pickup that rattled whenever I turned too sharp. My plan was to follow old state highways through the Appalachians, camp where I could, and take photos for a small travel blog that never really went anywhere. I thought maybe I'd find some forgotten towns, old diners, ghost stories. I got all of that, just not the way I expected. I stopped for gas at a lonely little station near a sign that read, "Welcome to Barlow County, population scratched out." The clerk was a pale old man with shaky hands who looked like he'd been waiting 100 years for someone to walk in. He watched me fill up and then said, "Quiet but steady, you staying on Route 19? I told him, "Yeah, heading north." He shook his head once, eyes sinking low. "Don't take the detour past Keswick Hollow," he said. "Roads washed out and things up that way don't like visitors." I laughed because people say stuff like that out here. He didn't laugh back. By the time I got back in my truck, the rain had turned to fog. It was thick, rolling, a living thing that followed the bends in the road. My GPS lost signal about 5 miles in, so I kept driving, figuring I'd find a town or a diner somewhere ahead. The map on the dash said there was a shortcut through the ridge, an old mining route, but the sign for it was half buried in weeds. I shouldn't have taken it. I still remember the sound my tires made when they left the main road, the crunch of gravel under wet leaves. The trees leaned in close. The deeper I went, the darker it got, even though it was barely 5 in the afternoon. The fog swallowed everything past the first few feet. I turned the radio on to cut the silence, but all I got was static, and underneath it, something faint like breathing. I thought it was interference, but when I turned the dial, it stayed. Slow, steady, almost human. I turned it off. About a mile in, I saw something on the side of the road. It looked like an old payphone, standing crooked in the mud. The cord was torn, the receiver dangling, yet as I drove past, it rang, sharp and clear, slicing through the fog. I hit the brakes without thinking. The sound stopped. I sat there, heart pounding, engine humming. Then it rang again. One long, slow ring. I don't know why I picked it up. Curiosity, maybe. When I lifted the receiver, there was no voice, just that same breathing, deep and wet like someone standing too close to the mic. Then a whisper, too faint to make out. I froze. The line clicked, and the sound cut off. The phone went dead in my hand. When I hung it back up, the air felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath again. I kept driving. A few miles later, I saw another sign, rusted, half-fallen, pointing toward a place called Keswick Hollow. I should have turned around. Instead, I followed it. The road turned to dirt, then mud, winding through a valley where the trees grew so close their branches touched. My headlights caught something glittering through the fog, shards of glass scattered across the road. I thought maybe there'd been a wreck. But when I stopped and got out, I realized they weren't random. Windshields. Dozens of them, stacked against trees, leaning on each other like gravestones. Some were cracked, others shattered clean through, arranged in perfect lines, reflecting my headlights like tiny eyes. Someone had put them there. Someone wanted them found. I felt eyes on me. The fog moved, slow and heavy, like it was breathing with me. I got back in the truck and tried to start it. The engine sputtered, then died. Tried again, nothing. I checked the fuel. Full. Battery was fine. Everything was fine except the feeling in my stomach that told me to run. Then I heard it again. The ring. The payphone. The payphone. Except it wasn't behind me anymore. It was somewhere deeper in the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. Each step squished in the mud. The sound grew louder, steady, like someone calling me deeper in. When I found it, the payphone was standing in the middle of the woods. No wires, no booth. Just the phone, nailed to a post, shining with dew. It rang again. I lifted it, and a voice said quietly, "Don't look up." I did. There was something in the branches. It was shaped like a person, but too long, its arms hanging down like ropes. Skin dark and smooth, almost wet, and its face stretched into a grin that didn't belong on anything human. Eyes burned red in the fog. The voice on the line whispered again, "Run." I dropped the phone and bolted. I ran until my lungs tore. When I reached the road, my truck's headlights flickered on by themselves. I jumped in, slammed the door, and hit the gas. The engine roared to life like it had never died. The rearview mirror showed the fog rolling faster, chasing me down the road. Something moved inside it, long arms crawling on all fours. I didn't look again. By the time I hit pavement, the fog was gone. So was the rain. I drove until I saw lights, an old convenience store with a single flickering sign that said, "Marvin's Stop and Go." I parked, heart hammering, and went inside. The bell above the door jingled weakly. Nobody was there. Shelves half empty, dust on everything. I called out, no answer, but I could hear a faint hum from the back, like machinery running. I followed it past a row of broken soda machines until I found the freezer. It was old, dented, but the light inside still glowed. Frost covered the glass. I wiped it with my sleeve and looked in. No food, no drinks, just hundreds of pieces of paper, handwritten notes folded neatly. I opened one. It said, "Don't answer when it rings." Another said, "It watches the ridge." Some were smudged with dirt, others with something darker, reddish-brown. One note near the back was newer, cleaner. It said, "Owen, stop reading." My chest went cold. I dropped the note. The lights flickered, once, twice, then the hum stopped. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my heart beat. I turned around. Someone was standing by the door. At first, I thought it was the clerk. But he was too tall, his shoulders touching the door frame. His head was wrong, tilted too far, like it had forgotten how to sit on a neck. I could see the outline of antlers curling from his skull. When he moved, it wasn't walking. It was gliding. The freezer light flickered again, and his reflection stretched across every glass surface. 100 versions of him, all smiling. I ran. I don't remember how I made it out. One moment I was in the store, the next I was behind the wheel again, tearing down the road. The headlights caught trees, then fog, then nothing. My hands shook so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. I drove until sunrise, until the mountains thinned and the signal bars came back on my phone. I stopped at a diner on the edge of some town whose name I never caught. The waitress asked if I was okay. I told her I'd been on the ridge. Her face drained. She said, real quiet, "You didn't answer it, did you?" I didn't say anything. She nodded like she already knew. That night, in a cheap motel, I heard it again. A ring. Slow, heavy, coming from the bathroom. I opened the door, and there it was, an old payphone sitting against the wall. The receiver lifted itself, and I swear I heard breathing through the static. Now, sometimes when I drive through the mountains, I see the fog gather too fast, like it's remembering me. My truck radio still catches that same sound, soft, human, waiting. And sometimes, in the rear view, I see the faint glow of red eyes watching from the ridge. I keep telling myself it was just a story, just my mind playing tricks. But every time I close my eyes, I see the note in the freezer with my name on it. And every night at 2:17 a.m., something rings. I was never the kind of person who scared easy, not after the work I had done most of my life, but what happened on that mountain road changed the way my mind works. My name is Colton Reeves, and I fix heating units for a living, the kind people forget about until winter hits and their whole house turns into an icebox. I live in a small place called Shumber Hill in western Tennessee, close to the deep ridges where the Appalachian chain cuts through the sky like old dark teeth. When I am not crawling under houses or tightening worn bolts on rusty metal shells, I like to drive the mountain backroads just to clear my head, windows cracked, slow radio hum, my mutt Ranger in the passenger seat snoring like an old tractor. Last October, right when the trees were burning golden red, something happened on one of those trips that I still cannot explain without feeling my chest tighten. The memory hits me like cold water on my spine. I had taken a detour down Ridge Spoon Road, a winding path that barely showed on newer maps, a forgotten stretch my uncle showed me when I was a kid. The pavement had cracks wide enough to swallow small rocks, and weeds pushed up through every break like green claws trying to pull the road apart. Ranger loved that place, always leaning forward, nose against the cracked window, tail thumping. But that day he was restless in a way that set my nerves on edge, shifting in the seat, whining low like he smelled something I couldn't. I thought it was just him getting older, maybe his joints hurting again, but then the quiet came. It was not the normal mountain hush I grew up with. It felt like someone had turned the whole world down. The wind held still, the soft hum of far birds broke off, even the engine of my truck sounded strange, like it was running underwater. The air pressed warm against my skin, not hot but heavy, easing the ache in my hands and slowing the tight pull in my lower back. It felt wrong, like a drug slipping into my blood, smoothing everything too fast, too sudden. Ranger stiffened beside me and let out one sharp bark, a sound he only makes when something is truly wrong. I hit the brakes out of instinct, tires crunching gravel as the truck jerked to a stop. Ranger's nails scraped the door as he lunged forward, staring hard at the tree line. Something moved in the brush just beyond the road, slow and heavy, the sound thick and wet like old hooves sinking into soft clay. My skin prickled even though the warmth of my body kept trying to calm me down. I leaned forward to see, but the woods looked empty, the shadows smooth and untouched. Then the leaves dipped, not like a small animal pushing through. It was deeper, like something large was stepping down and trying very hard not to be seen. My breath jammed in my throat as the moss at the forest edge pressed down into the shape of a foot, too large to be any person I've ever met, far too broad, the outline soft but clear. Pine needles bent, slow and deliberate, as if something invisible shifted its weight. Ranger fell to a crouch, head low, tail tucked tight, muscles trembling. The sound that followed ripped through the trees so hard the steering wheel shook beneath my hands. It was lower than any growl, sharper than any metal scraping on the ground, like steel twisting against bone. My ribs vibrated, and for a moment I could not hear anything but that deep tearing cry. Ranger pressed into my leg, shaking so violently his nails rattled against the floor. I wanted to drive. Every bit of my mind told me to slam the truck into reverse and tear down the road as far as I could go, but something in that warmth held me still. It felt like a soft hand pushing against my shoulder, keeping me grounded, telling me to wait as if waiting was the right thing to do. Worse, this strange desire crept into me, a need to look, to see whatever stood in those trees. I knew I shouldn't want that. I knew it was wrong, but the pull tightened around me like a rope. Nothing happened for a long moment, just the soft settling of the forest floor like something huge shifted its stance. Then it stopped. The warmth eased away, not gone, but pulled back just enough for my breath to come back in shaky little bursts. I did not see it that day, though I felt it watching from just past the shadow line. After that, every time I drove the ridges, I felt it pacing me, keeping to the tree line, moving when I moved, quiet when I stopped, never close enough to catch, but never letting me forget it was there. 2 weeks passed and each trip felt stranger. I kept telling myself it was the road messing with my mind, or maybe exhaustion from long work days, but deep down, I knew better. It wanted something. I could feel it moving through the silence like a slow, heavy heartbeat. Every time Ranger lifted his head and stared at nothing, I felt a cold knot gather in my stomach. One day, half to myself, half to the heavy quiet around me, I muttered that it couldn't get me if I stayed on the road. The moment the words left my mouth, the noise stopped. No pacing in the brush, no soft pressure marks in the moss, no breath of movement. The forest went dead again, the same hush that numbed the world before, but whatever was tracking me didn't move again that day, not until the last time. It was late October when I took Ranger up to a place called Collar's Bluff, a lookout point where the trees thin out and the horizon opens like a wide, broken bowl. He was slower than usual, dragging behind me, tail low. I reached the clearing and stopped to breathe in the cold air. The sky hung silver, clouds stretched thin like pulled wool. I leaned on the old wooden fence and watched the tree line move soft in the distance. Ranger flopped behind me, his sides rising in slow, tired waves. Then something crossed the ridge ahead. At first it looked like heat shimmer rolling between two tall pines, but the shape thickened, like a person outlined in a blur. It stood upright, shoulders broad, taller than any man I've known, the air around it warping like a mirage. The edges bent and twisted like hot air on asphalt, but I could tell it was solid beneath that strange flicker. The shape turned its head, and even though I could not see a face, I knew it saw me. My skin crawled as the warmth rushed back into my body, seeping through my muscles until my legs refused to move. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He only stared, his ears pressed back as far as they could go. He didn't move a muscle, not even when the shape shifted its stance like it was deciding something. It took one step, the ground pressing down without any visible body touching it. Then the shimmer tightened like pulled fabric and vanished into the trees so fast I'd barely caught the last flicker. I stayed there for a long time, unable to move, numb from the way the warmth had settled around my bones. When it finally faded, leaving only the cold air and the soft rustle of leaves, Ranger let out a quiet whine and pressed against my leg as if guiding me back toward the truck. I followed him because I knew if I stayed any longer, something in those trees might call me again, and this time I wasn't sure I had the strength to resist. Since that day, I stick to the busier mountain roads, the ones with traffic signs and fresh gravel spread by county workers. I tell my friends where I'm heading before I go anywhere, and I keep a flashlight, whistle, and compass in my glove box now. Things I used to make fun of hikers for carrying. Ranger comes with me, but he doesn't lean forward anymore. He stays close, quiet, always watching the tree line. I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't a man and it wasn't an animal. It was something that knew the mountains better than any of us, something older, something patient. I can still feel the way it watched me, not with hunger but with purpose, like it was waiting for me to take a step I never took. Sometimes, late at night, when the house settles and the wind slides over the shutters, I hear that low metallic cry in the back of my mind, the sound of steel grinding through bone. I close my eyes and see that shimmer between the trees, head turning, body shifting like it remembers me. And I know one day, if I ever leave the main road again, it might come looking.